You have a program.
What you need?
I'd like to get one too. Thank you. I just want to see this. Okay. Thank you. Are you one of the speakers?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
We're in the right place.
Okay.
Are you?
Yes, I'm. Yeah, that's me.
Phil? How do you pronounce that?
Silbiger.
Silbiger. Nice
Yeah.
to meet you, Dr.
And
Silbiger.
you're very welcome. And I go by Lex. Alexander's too many
I go
syllables.
by Dee.
Didi. Okay. Nice to meet you, Didi.
Nice to meet you too. These seats are dangerous for old people.
I'm sorry?
These seats,
Yeah.
they're
Dangerous.
dangerous.
Yes.
The seats are dangerous because they roll. When you
I
sit
just
down.
noticed that.
Yeah.
But thanks for alerting me.
One time when I was here,
Yeah.
I didn't really know,
Yeah.
and I sat down and
Ooh.
the seat took off and went, and I almost fell on my back.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think these are good.
I know. No,
They're not
you're
safe.
right. Thanks for alerting me to the. There's
Yeah.
no lock in them. Is there no? Sometimes rollers have a lock, but this one
Yeah.
does. Yeah. Well, just need to be careful.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'll try one more time. Good morning, everyone. That was wonderful. Welcome to Forsyth Tech. I'm Janet Spriggs, and it is my deep honor and privilege every day to serve as president of your community college, Forsyth Technical Community College. We were meant to gather here in this room in January. A snowstorm, unfortunately, delayed us. Who would have thought of that in North Carolina? But I believe that some moments are worth waiting for, and this is certainly one of those moments. Today, Forsyth Tech pauses to do something that matters deeply, and that is to remember, to bear witness, and in a few moments to hear history told not from a textbook, but from a man who lived it. Dr. Alexander Lex Silbiger will share his personal story, his life under Nazi occupation, his family's extraordinary escape from persecution, and the journey that ultimately brought him to the United States and to North Carolina. And that is a gift that none of us should take lightly. Before we hear from Dr. Silbiger, I want to acknowledge something else in this room that I hope you have had an opportunity to visit, and that is the 42-panel Holocaust exhibit from the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, available to you to explore here today. And I want to recognize the educators that are here today, too, who are going to have an opportunity soon, I think, to receive a classroom book set, because what happens in this room should not stay in this room. It should travel home with students and into classrooms and into conversations. That is exactly why we are here. At Forsyth Tech, a place of promise, we believe education is how we build a more just and humane world. Remembrance is not separate from that mission. It is the mission. I want to extend our sincere thanks to the Forsyth Tech Foundation and the Peter Thull Fund for Social Justice, which was established in memory of Peter Thull, who was a passionate advocate for justice, equality, and human dignity. We are honored to have members of the Thull family with us today and proud to recognize the lasting impact of Mr. Thull's legacy. To open our program, it is my honor to introduce Alana Meltzer Holderfield, Assistant Director of Muse Winston-Salem, an organization that uses arts and culture to connect and strengthen our community. And Alana is a wonderful voice to help us set the stage for the powerful testimony that is to come. Please join me in welcoming Alana to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Dr. Spriggs for that lovely introduction and for welcoming us here onto the Forsyth Tech campus today. My name is Alana Meltzer-Holderfield, and I'm the Assistant Director of Muse Winston-Salem. We're a community history museum here in Winston-Salem. We just finished renovating a building on South Liberty Street, just on the edge of downtown. So please stay connected with us, and you'll be able to hear about our reopening, which will come sometime, hopefully a little less than a year from now. So stay in touch, stay connected with us on social media or our e-newsletter, and we'll keep you up to date as we are under development with all of our exhibits. And we are really looking forward to opening for the community soon. We are so pleased to have been able to partner with Forsyth Tech and the Forsyth Tech Foundation and the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust and Temple Emmanuel for this important program today. And we're honored that we'll all get to hear from Dr. Alexander Silbiger shortly in his own voice to learn his story, which is a very special opportunity that we're grateful for. I would like to take a minute before we get to that to introduce one other speaker. As Dr. Spriggs mentioned, this program was originally scheduled for January 27th, which is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And at that time, Mayor Alan Joines officially declared January 27th, 2026 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day in Winston-Salem with a proclamation. So today we have Winston-Salem Mayor Pro Tem and Council Member Denise Adams here to read the proclamation. Mayor Pro Tem Adams has represented the North Ward since 2009. She serves as the Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and Chair of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee. Adams is also a board member of the Winston-Salem Urban MPO Transportation Advisory Committee and an executive board member of several municipal organizations. She has been a strong advocate for affordable housing and addressing gentrification, and as part of her private sector experience, is a leader in promoting data and performance measures to improve city government. Please welcome Mayor Pro Tem and Council Member Denise Adams. I think someone moved our folders around. Hold on. Oh, it got slid to the back right here. Let me pull it out for you. Okay. There it is. It was hiding. So I'll give that to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good morning. It is so humbling to be here to stand in for I call him my sidekick, Mayor Alan Joines. I was born and raised here in Winston-Salem all my life, except when I went away to college. And one of the things that I am most proudest of, as you, is are my ancestors and my history and my culture. The African-American culture, as you know, has somewhat of a story as yours. And I believe that when we begin to want to remove history of what really happened in this world and to people, then that's something that all of us are going to have to stand up and protect. Because we can't have one culture's, kept and another culture is wiped away. Because our young people who are the next, they are going to want to know everything about us and what we did to stop anyone that tried to rewrite the history of the world and of all the people. On behalf of the City of Winston-Salem and the Office of the Mayor, whereas the United Nations General Assembly designated January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And whereas January 27th is a date to remember the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution. And whereas there has been a documented rise of anti-Semitism around the globe, and whereas it is more important than ever for citizens of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County to recognize the critical lessons of Holocaust history as we commemorate the victims and honor the survivors on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And whereas, since the 2019-2020 school year, Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools has offered a Holocaust elective course at the high school level. And whereas the Holocaust is being taught in English and language arts classrooms in grades 6 through 12, in social studies classrooms in grades 6 through 11. And multiple schools have hosted Holocaust survivor speakers both in classrooms and at community events. And whereas the Holocaust, there are 2 Holocaust survivors still living in Winston-Salem. And I didn't know that. Margot Lobry, who turned 100 in September 2025, and Zahara Boyd. And whereas Forsyth Technical Community College, Muse, Winston-Salem, the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and Temple Emmanuel are hosting a public International Holocaust Remembrance Day program that will include the sharing of a personal story of resilience, survival, and hope by Holocaust survivor Dr. Alexander Lex Silbiger. Now, therefore, I.J. Allen Joynes, Mayor of the City of Winston-Salem, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim January 27th, 2026 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day, given under his seal this 27th day of January 26th. J. Allen Joynes, Mayor of Winston-Salem, and on behalf of the City Council and our 259,000, yeah, we getting there to 300, 259,000 citizens, we want to welcome you. We want to appreciate you for you remembering again your Holocaust, your history, and your past. Let it never leave your hearts, let it never leave your mind, and let it never leave your spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Lori Schaefer is a nationally recognized Holocaust educator and educational leader with 29 years of experience in public secondary education in Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools at Mount Tabor High School. She taught English and social injustice, the Holocaust and modern-day genocide, grounding her pedagogy in survivor testimony, primary sources, and critical ethical inquiry. A longtime participant in professional development through the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, she served as a museum teacher fellow in 2006 and later contributed to national conferences, educator training, and curriculum development initiatives. In North Carolina, Schaefer played a central role in implementing the Gisela Abramson Holocaust Education Act, co-authoring more than 400 pages of standards-aligned English language arts curriculum and producing instructional resources for educators statewide. She authored the original curriculum for the Women of the Shoah Monument in Greensboro, later serving as education consultant and project manager before recently becoming executive director for the Greensboro-based organization. After retiring from classroom teaching in 2024, Schaefer became chair of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust and an Echoes and Reflections facilitator, continuing to lead statewide and national professional development and curriculum initiatives focused on ethical Holocaust and genocide education. Please welcome Lori Schaefer.
All right, good morning.
Morning.
It is an honor to stand before you today, especially in a state with such a remarkable legacy. North Carolina is known as the first in flight, but it is also important to remember we were the first state in the country to establish a Holocaust Council, recognizing as early as the 1980s that the Holocaust education is essential to an informed and responsible society. That early leadership matters now more than ever. Because while history may feel distant, the realities that we face today remind us that its lessons are not. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents in the United States have reached historic highs for 4 consecutive years, with 9,354 incidents recorded in 2024 alone. The highest number ever recorded since tracking began in 1979. This represents a 5% increase over 2023, but more significantly, a 344% increase over the past 5 years, and an astonishing 893% increase in the past decade. These incidents include harassment, vandalism, and assault, and they are not confined to distant places. They're happening in communities like ours, in schools, online spaces, and in public life. At the same time, we face a challenge that is quieter but just as urgent: a lack of knowledge. A 2020 Claims Conference survey revealed that 63% of young adults in the United States did not know that 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, and nearly half could not name a single concentration camp. Here in North Carolina, the data reflected similar gaps in understanding, with 75% of North Carolinians surveyed not be able to answer 3 core questions. 1, have you heard about the Holocaust? 2, can you name 1 concentration camp? Or 3, how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust? If you could answer all 3 of those questions, you have more knowledge than 3/4 of the people in our state. This is clear evidence that Holocaust education cannot be assumed, it must be intentionally taught. And that is exactly what we are doing here in North Carolina. In 2021, after the survey was taken, the North Carolina legislature passed the Gazella-Abramson Holocaust Education Act, which requires Holocaust education in middle school and high school, social studies and English every year, with the exception of social studies in 12th grade, because the personal finance course does not necessarily correlate to teaching about the Holocaust. That's why it goes to 11th grade in social studies. So we have given educators the tools to go deeper, to move beyond dates and definitions, and to explore the human stories at the heart of this history. And that is where our greatest strength lies, our teachers. I know I'm a little biased, as I am a teacher, but I truly believe that they are the way that we can combat anti-Semitism. They are training an entire generation of students to think critically. So the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust exists to support them, because teachers are our most important line of defense. Through professional development, curriculum resources, webinars, workshops, and traveling exhibits like the one you see behind you and may have visited before you came in, we equip educators not only with accurate historical content, but with meaningful ways to engage students, helping them think critically, ask questions, and recognize the consequences of indifference. My years in teaching in Winston-Salem and Forsyth County schools were foundational in preparing me for this work. It was in my classroom that I saw firsthand the power of education to shape understanding, empathy, and responsibility. In my 29 years of teaching at Mount Tabor High School, I learned and grew alongside my students in my own knowledge about the Holocaust, knowledge I needed in 2007 when 2 boys whose families had just moved to North Carolina and were in the Hammerskins, a national neo-Nazi skinhead group, sat in my English 2 classroom alongside a number of Jewish students from our community. They had swastikas on their necks, and their parents espoused the same point of view that they were also sharing. I have never researched and learned more than that year, as sharing accurate history and the human story of the Holocaust, individualizing it and taking those statistics and translating them into people, were essential tools in combating the hate that these 2 young men were immersed in every day when they went home, into their own home. That year, I learned even Nazi ideology can be blunted and even destroyed by Holocaust education, as one of those young men later wrote to tell me that what he had learned in my class made him question his beliefs and leave the movement a few years later. I never knew what happened to the other young man, but I hope I was able to plant the seeds of historical truth in his heart that one day perhaps grew into his own independence. For decades, One of the most powerful elements of that education has been the voices of Holocaust survivors themselves. Survivors like Margot Lobrie, my friend right here, who has spoken to countless students, including in my own classroom, and who, at 100 years old, continues to inspire us simply by her presence here today. And survivors like Lex Silberger, who continues to share his story of his escape from Nazi-occupied Europe and engages audiences with a message that is both deeply personal and profoundly universal. After the Holocaust, nearly 400 Holocaust survivors settled in North Carolina, building lives, families, and communities. Today, only a handful are still here to share their stories, which means that the responsibility now shifts to us. We must preserve their voices through recorded testimony, memoirs, and educational resources. We must ensure that students continue to encounter the human stories behind the history. That is why exhibits like Finding Home, North Carolina Holocaust Survivors, which features 40 of those 400, are so important. As you'll see in the back of the room, this exhibit brings history to life in a way that textbooks alone cannot, reminding us that these were not distant figures, but our neighbors, families, members of our own communities. We invite you to explore the exhibit after our program and learn more about these survivors who made such an impact in North Carolina. And in that spirit of continuing their legacy, I'm excited to share that today we'll be giving away 2 class sets of Lex Silberger's memoir to 2 Winston and Forsyth County school teachers who entered a drawing that we had, helping to bring his story directly into more classrooms. Those 2 teachers would be Haley Drain from the downtown school and Adriana Nicolaitis Tesaudos from East Forsyth High School. They're in these lovely bags. You too can buy Lex's memoir on Amazon. The need for this work is not diminishing, it is growing. As we look around the world today, we are reminded that the conditions that allowed hatred to take hold in the past do not simply disappear. They must be actively challenged through education, awareness, and a commitment to human dignity. Holocaust education does not tell students what to think. It teaches them how to think, how to recognize bias, how to question misinformation, how to understand the consequences of choices, and how to see the humanity in others. That is education at its very best. And that is why the work of the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust and the 8 other Holocaust education organizations in our state and the educators we serve matters so deeply. Because when teachers are equipped, students are empowered. And when students are empowered, the future becomes more informed, more compassionate, and more just. Thank you. And it is through voices like these, voices that carry history, not as something distant, but as something lived, that our work becomes real. It is now my great honor, then, to introduce our speaker. Alexander Lex Silberger is a Holocaust survivor who now calls Durham, North Carolina, home. As a young boy in Europe during World War II, Lex experienced firsthand the dangers of Nazi persecution. I'm going to let him tell that story. After the war, he later came to the United States, earning a master's degree in physics and a PhD in engineering mechanics from Columbia University. Encouraged by his first wife, he went on to pursue a second PhD in music, eventually joining the faculty at Duke University, where he built a distinguished career. For many years, Lex carried his story quietly. It was not until 2019, on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, that he chose to share it publicly for the first time. Since then, he has spoken to students and educators across our state, ensuring that this history is not only remembered but understood. As one of the few remaining survivors able to speak firsthand, his voice is both rare and deeply important. So please join me in welcoming Alexander Lex Silberger. Okay. Do you want this chair anywhere else? You want over here, maybe?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Here, I'm gonna move this.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Can you all hear me? Yes? I want to thank you all for coming to listen to my story. It's a story about things that happened long ago, but not without bearing to what's happening today. It's also a complicated story, and in order not to lose track, I will follow a script. I'm sure you all still remember how nearly 6 years ago, the COVID pandemic unexpectedly changed our lives. Today, I want to tell you about another time many more years ago when my familiar and comfortable world changed almost overnight into a place full of danger, fear, and uncertainty. It was during those days that I had an extraordinary adventure, which took me far from my home, which lasted a long time, taking over a good chunk of my childhood, and which was very scary. But this adventure saved my life. So let me begin at the beginning. I was born in 1935, 90 plus years ago, if you do the math, in the Netherlands, a small country about a third of the size of North Carolina. It's adjacent to Germany, it's a much bigger neighbor, and it's informally known as Holland. And the people are called Dutch, and that's also what our language is called. Here's a picture of my family, my parents. Let's see if this works, yeah. You see that arrow? Yeah. This is a picture of my parents at celebrating a wedding anniversary. My older brother, Herman, whom I called Hermie, and here is me before I grew all this facial hair. A few days before my 5th birthday, the German army invaded my country. I well remember the morning of the invasion. I was awakened by loud banging noises. I went to the window to see what was going on. Against the bright blue spring sky, I saw plumes of smoke. The German army was making a surprise assault on my city, the city of The Hague, which is the seat of the Dutch government. A few days later, in the midst of my 5th birthday party, sirens went off signaling an air raid, and we had to rush to an improvised shelter in our basement while donning gas masks. An attack from the air, during which at any moment a bomb may drop and explode your entire world, is a frightening experience like no other. The next day, Holland capitulated, its small army being no match for the powerful German war machine. Soon their troops marched through our streets. The German occupation came as a shock. Holland had remained neutral during the First World War. It had not seen foreign armies on its soil since the time of Napoleon in the early 1800s. Although barely more than 1% of the population was Jewish, for Holland's Jews, like my family, the southern German presence in Holland was the cause of much anxiety. At first, the life of Jews under the occupation, while unpleasant, did not appear life-threatening. And this lulled many people into a false sense of security. Maybe it was not going to be so bad after all. Maybe it was just a matter of sitting things out for a short while until the British and American armed forces would come and kick the Germans out. To be sure, there were rumors of the brutal mistreatment of Jews in Eastern Europe, but people could not imagine it happening in Holland. Jews have lived in Holland for many centuries. They have made important contributions to its economy and its culture. They have become a greatly valued part of the population. The Dutch people would never let their fellow citizens be mistreated in this manner. And no one could begin to conceive what was the eventual goal of the Nazis: to extinguish the life of every Jew in Holland, which means each of the approximately 120,000 Dutch Jews, as well as another 20,000 German Jews, like Anne Frank and her family, who had fled to Holland to escape the Nazi regime. To achieve this goal, the Germans first had to identify who was a Jew. Not so easy, because perhaps even more than in the US, Jews had become to blend in with the non-Jewish population. As a first step, everyone in the country was required to register and state their religion, which seemed innocent enough. Oh. What happens here? Here we go. If you were a Jew, you received a big fat J stamped on your ID card. And if you were stopped in the streets without your ID, you are in big trouble. After that, they introduced a series of increasingly restrictive measures on Jewish social lives. A new one almost every week. If you were a Jew, you were not permitted to go to movies, theaters, swimming pools, beaches, public parks, concerts, and sports events, libraries, restaurants, and cafes. Everywhere were those signs reading, "No Jews allowed," in Dutch it rhymes, "for Joden verboden." The first restriction to affect me personally was that Jewish children were banned from public education. When at 6 I was ready to start school, I could not go to the neighborhood school where all my non-Jewish friends went. Instead, I had to take a streetcar by myself to the other end of town where a Jewish private school had been organized. Further decrees included restrictions on movement. You could no longer own a car or even a bicycle. You were banned from trains and eventually from all public transportation. All these measures aimed to isolate the Jews from the rest of the populations and humiliate them, to make them appear different and inferior, subhuman. And this method, by the way, was consciously modeled on the American Jim Crow laws. The Nazis thus hoped to minimize Dutch resistance by moving to the final phase of their plan. The last major decree was that every Jew, children included, had to wear a cloth yellow star sewn on your clothes over your heart with the word Jew in a kind of fake Hebrew script. People complied. They really had no choice. And a few may even have been proud to wear their star. Most Jews probably did not yet realize that this star marked them for extermination. The final phase, initiated in the summer of 1942 and largely completed by the next spring, when Holland could be declared Judenrein, meaning cleansed of Jews. The extermination took place not in Holland itself, but in regions of East Europe where there had always existed less solidarity with the Jewish population. The Jews were deported under the pretext that they were merely being transported to work camps. They were first taken to Westerbork, a holding camp near the German border, and here you see them waiting in Amsterdam for their transport. And here you see them in that camp. From Westerbork, each week, a train transported 1,000 Jews to Auschwitz in Poland. A 2-day journey during which you are squeezed in a padlocked cattle car without food, waters, or facilities. Upon their arrival, the old people and the young children were sent straight to the gas chambers, while the others, after having a number branded on their forearms, were worked to death in labor camps or subjected to the unspeakable horrors of medical experiments. Many Jews tried to avoid deportation by going into hiding behind walls, like Anne Frank and her family, in closets, under floorboards, in barns, and all kinds of other places. And this was not only uncomfortable, but also risky. Many of these underdrivers, as they were called in Holland, were betrayed. Some people, quite a few, committed suicide to avoid deportation. And a small number of Jews, only a trickle really, attempted to escape entirely from Nazi-controlled territory. This was possibly more dangerous and surely more difficult than going into hiding. It required crossing several well-guarded borders and passing through other German-occupied territories. Nevertheless, among the few who decided to take the risk were the members of my family. Early in 1942, 2 years after the onset of the German occupation, my parents began to realize that despite Germans' effort to hide their ultimate intentions, things looked bad for the Jews in Holland. It would be best to try to leave, no matter how risky. Now, the only feasible escape route at this time was heading south through Belgium. Here, by the way, is a map of Europe. The brown areas are where the German occupation was, and in fact, that big snaking purple, whatever color, shows the limit of German control. Now, as you can see there, let's see if my arrow can show. So this is the Netherlands. It was already brown because it was annexed by Germany. Here's Germany itself. So we certainly wouldn't want to escape going east where Germany was. And you couldn't really go north or west because that's where the water was. And that coastline was very well defended because the Germans feared an invasion from England across the Channel. So the only place to go was south, where it was Belgium and France, and more about that shortly. So secretly, my folks began preparing for our escape, not telling their closest children and family, and not even their children of their plan. They did, however, decide to take their 2 young children along rather than leave them in hiding with a Christian family, as people often did, sometimes with tragic results. My folks were determined to keep the family together at all costs, even if this taking along 2 young children would much complicate their escape. In the early morning of 13th of April, 1942, my mother woke me up and told me, "Hurry and get ready for a little trip to the country." I was surprised because I'd not been told anything about this beforehand, and because of the restrictions, we had not been traveling anywhere. I became even more surprised when we did not return home that evening, but sneaked across the border to Belgium. Once we arrived there, I learned that we would not be going back home until the Germans were gone from Holland. So suddenly, and without preparation, this 6-year-old was cut from all his friends, his toys, everything he owned except for a few clothes. And I was also separated from my previous identity, since I acquired a new family name, a new nationality, and a new religion. On the continuation of our journey, we hoped to pass as Christian tourists from Belgium, and I was warned not to tell anyone my real family name or to mention that I was Jewish, which would endanger the whole family. My parents did not have a clear idea where we would ultimately go. In their planning, that focused on how to get out of occupied Holland and not yet worried about the second big problem, finding a place that would grant us asylum. They hoped eventually to reach some territory not on German rule, perhaps Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal, which were all neutral. Those are the kind of, gray areas here, Switzerland, Spain. But there was no internet to help map out your journey. Instead, they had to rely on various contacts provided by the underground resistance, which my father had cooperated back in Holland. The resistance network was spotty and not necessarily trustworthy. Usually payment was demanded for their services, and occasionally they obtained additional payment, double dipping, by betraying you to the Gestapo or the German police. But my folks had no alternative. From Belgium, we moved further south to France. And where we changed our names once again And I was given even stricter rules. I was not to speak in public at all, since the only language I knew then was Dutch, and that might betray us. I was warned not to make friends with anyone my age, and during the entire journey, which in the end lasted almost a year, I would not be attending school. When we reached Paris, right here, when we reached Paris, my parents learned that their local contact, who was supposed to help us continue our journey, had just been arrested. We were stuck in Paris, and we remained there for some 6 weeks while my parents searched for someone to help us move on. Finally, they succeeded in finding a person to do this, and we proceeded towards the most difficult part of our route, the crossing of the demarcation line. And now I need to explain to you that at this time, only the northern part of France was occupied by the German troops. The southern part, which shows here as green, was under a kind of, it was nominally not occupied, but actually it was ruled by a German-installed puppet government headquartered in Vichy, the town of Vichy. You may sometimes have heard about Vichy, France, and that's what is referred to. And this boundary separating the two parts of France, that was the one that was under especially heavy guard and required the services of an experienced passeur, as they were called, or coyote. Our crossing, in fact, was not unlike that of the illegal immigrants at the US-Mexican border, involving running through fields in sparsely populated areas, crawling under barbed wire fences, and finally crossing a river in a little rowboat. And that is where this happened. After reaching the other side, our passeur took us to a small hotel in the nearby village of Saint-Coin. And there, the local police chief, apparently tipped off by our passeur, came to arrest us. We were, after all, illegal aliens, lacking valid documents and permits to enter the country. My parents explained our situation, assured them they would be able to get the necessary papers from representatives of the Dutch government, which after the invasion had moved to England in exile. Besides, if my parents were thrown in jail, who would take care of their 2 young children? Apparently, they succeeded in persuading him not to separate the parents from the children. He told them we could stay in the hotel, but we would have to remain there until those documents arrived. Now, here I have a few pictures from Saint-Coin, the first photos I have from our journey. Here you see me, little kid up front, with my brother and my dad. And here was my mother. Here I was playing border guard because I have become obsessed by borders. You can understand that. Here was the hotel where we stayed. Now this may be hard to see, but actually we are right here. Here's me, and here's my brother. I don't know if you can picture that. And by the way, that hotel still exists. You can actually book a room there on the internet today. It took, I think that's all the pictures I have, it took another 4 months to obtain the necessary documents that would allow us to leave France, a time of growing apprehension for my parents because Jews were beginning to be deported, even in unoccupied France, and the Germans could decide any moment to occupy the rest of France, which in fact they did, only 2 weeks after we managed to get out. A representative of the Dutch government was able to provide us with identity papers. And here you see one for my mother. And if you probably cannot read this, but it says here our confession, our religion as Protestant, which of course was not true. But nevertheless, this would not allow us to enter Spain, where we hoped to go, which was neutral, unless we had a way of leaving Spain again, because the Spanish government did not want Jewish refugees to remain in their country. On the other hand, most other countries were not keen on taking them in. The Dutch government in London hoped, however, that the Jews might find a hospitable asylum in one of the few small Dutch colonies on the other side of the Atlantic, which were still free. After several months, they were able to arrange for us and a number of other Dutch refugees to get on a Spanish ship that was to sail to Suriname, at the time a Dutch colony on the northeast coast of South America. We finally could cross the border into Spain, and after a brief stay in Madrid, we traveled to the port town of Vigo, where to board our ship, the Marqués de Camillas, for the Atlantic crossing. And here are a couple of photos from that ship, which before the war had been a kind of luxury ship taking tourists to Cuba or the States. Before we left, however, we learned that the governor of Suriname decided he would not admit Jewish refugees, even if they were Dutch citizens. You know, it would be like you would not be allowed to enter Puerto Rico, even if you were an American citizen. He claimed he was afraid we might become a burden to the community. There might be troublemakers among us, or even spies. Other Dutch colonies in the Caribbean, like Curacao and Aruba, did not want us either. And in those days, countries like the United States or Canada were certainly not welcoming boatloads of Jewish refugees. Finally, the island of Jamaica, a British colony, agreed to take us in. And here you see our map of our crossing, and passing by Trinidad, but we didn't stop there really, oops, too soon, and ending in Jamaica, little island right here. In Jamaica, we were not given total freedom, but were detained in a refugee camp some distance from Kingston, the island's capital. The camp consisted of a cluster of wooden barracks surrounded by barbed wire fences. If you look carefully, oh, we'll get back there in a minute. Here's one, here's another one. Seems, okay, we'll get there. The accommodations were rather Spartan. Okay, now we go to that picture. With wooden flaps, as you see, instead of windows, and communal bathrooms in a separate structure. Here are a few more photos from the camp. Here I am as my family on the, I guess that's your right, my mother, dad, Herman, and me, and these other people were other refugees like us who had made it there. And here, you could leave the camp during the day with a pass, but you had to return by the evening. And the Dutch refugees could only leave the camp permanently if another country would accept them. And here you see one of those guard houses, and I'm right there in the middle. Conditions may not have been so much worse than in a summer camp, except you were forced to stay there for an indefinite length of time, perhaps several years. On the other hand, our lives were no longer in danger, and for that we were grateful. I did not have such a bad time. After the long months of isolations, I now had a lot of other children to play with, and the tropical weather was beautiful every day. However, the enforced leisure became frustrating for the adults, and my parents were relieved when after 3 months, they were the first of the refugees who could bid Jamaica farewell. The Caribbean island of Curacao decided to welcome us, after all, because my father's engineering skills were needed to work on its harbor. So approximately a full year after we left Holland, we were able to return to a more or less normal life, and I could resume my schooling, which I'd missed all this time. 2 years later, Germany was defeated and the war ended. And after a few months, we were able to return to Holland. But the Holland to which we returned was not the Holland we had left only a few years earlier. Our house in The Hague, while still standing, had been totally gutted, with every fixture removed. It could be, and it was fixed up. But some tragic news awaited us. After having been uncertain all those years of the fate of my mother's parents, we learned they had been carried off to Auschwitz in Poland only a few months after we left and murdered with poison gas. I still have fond memories of my grandparents, who lived only a few blocks from us, and they doted on me. The thoughts of their last days and final moments continues to haunt me. Furthermore, discovering what happened to them, I began to realize what would have been my fate if we had not left in 1942. Only a few months, we would also have been rounded up and taken to Westerbork, and from there, the horrific trains to Auschwitz. A small number of able-bodied adults survived the camps, but children and old people did not stand a chance, and I would not have survived a year. Here is a list of Jewish children born in 1935, the year in which I was born, and in the same city of Rotterdam. You imagine you cannot see all those names, and that doesn't matter. But all these kids there were systematically murdered in their 7th or 8th year. You can see here's their birth years, and here are the years where they were murdered, 1935, 1942, and so on. Yeah, the Germans kept good records. And my name would have been on that list, I understood then. I owe my life to the extraordinary courage and resourcefulness of my parents. At first, my parents tried to resume their pre-war life best they could. And a few years after our return, I celebrated my bar mitzvah, which is the Jewish confirmation ceremony. Eventually, my folks, like many other surviving Dutch Jews, no longer felt comfortable living in Holland, with so many of the people they had cared about missing. In early 1949, 3 years after their return, they decided to go back to Curacao. And after finishing high school there, I came to America to go to college. And eventually I decided to stay and become a citizen. I married an American woman, and in 1984, I moved to Durham to take a position in the music department at Duke University. In the years following the war, I rarely thought about my escape experience. It happened so long ago, during my early childhood, it really had no bearing on my present life. My parents almost never talked about it, and few of my friends were even aware of this part of my past. The Nazi persecution of European Jews was an ugly part of our history, but fortunately, it was now behind us. People had learned the horrible consequences of unchecked racial and religious hatred, and they vowed, never again. But in recent years, I began to realize it was happening again, and again, and again. Rwanda, Bosnia, Sudan, Myanmar, on. And now the virus of anti-Semitism and other ethnic hatreds has begun to spread even to Western Europe and the United States. I decided that as a member of the last surviving generation who witnessed the Holocaust, I must out myself and tell my story. I did so in a memoir recently published, you saw that. I began visiting schools and community groups in this area. In North Carolina, I reminded my audiences that what I experienced as a child, my city being bombed, my country being occupied by a foreign army, my family having to flee and run for our lives, looking desperately for asylum, and ending up in a refugee camp far from our homeland. All of this is being experienced right now as we speak by thousands and thousands who are desperately fleeing from the horrors of war, persecution, and starvation, and who are searching for a place where they can go and rebuild their lives. We may think of them as foreign, not like us. They come from remote places. They speak poor English often, if at all. Some dress oddly and don't look like we do, but that's only a thin skin, under which they are human beings with the same needs and the same hopes that we have. Those Somalis, Afghans, and Ukrainians trying to make their way across Europe, and those Central Americans and Venezuelans walking thousands of miles through jungles and deserts while carrying their children on their backs. They could have been you and me. Sometimes they break the laws of the countries they enter without having the proper papers. But so did my family, or I wouldn't be here to tell my story. We must remember what happened to the Jews in Europe 80 years ago and open our hearts to these desperate refugees. And we must never stop fighting that virus of hatred, wherever it arises, so we don't become complicit in persecuting its victims. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lex. There is one important question we do need to ask Lex because he does have something else to share with us. So Lex, can you share with us, how did your family finance this journey?
Okay, that's a very good question, because all this time we had to spend every night sleeping in a hotel or boarding house. We had to eat every meal in a restaurant or cafe. How did we sustain ourselves? You know, there were credit cards or ATMs did not just exist, and Dutch money would have betrayed us. Well, here's the story. My father's father had been a diamond merchant. A lot of Jews were in the diamond business because it's one of the few professions which earlier only few professions Jews were allowed to practice. Now, my father had been an engineer, but like most of us, we know something about the profession of our parents. We know something about what they did. And my father knew something about the diamond business. So he had converted as much money as he could get hold of into diamonds. But then the question was how to take those diamonds along. And this was his solution. My father was a pipe smoker. I was actually, too, in my younger years. Are there any pipe smokers here? Former pipe smokers? No, I guess it's become out of style, but when I was young, it wasn't. Well, my father had a special pipe, which you see a picture, the model called the Bulldog. And as you can see, it has a very thick stem. So he had hollowed it out, and he put the diamonds in there. And then on the journey, when we needed some money, he would sell, and that's the thing, he knew how to sell those diamonds, he knew what they were worth, he knew how to find people. And so that sustained us as long as we were in those occupied countries. So I feel partially, we owe our life in some ways to this pipe. I actually still have this pipe, one of the few things I have from that period. My mother also had a lipstick, which similarly had been engineered to hide diamonds. So that's the story of the pipe. You're welcome. Okay, that's the end here. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring it, actually.
It's okay, the picture's fine. Yeah. Okay, do you want me to take this with you?
Yeah, okay, I'll take this. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. At the end of our program, Lex will be sitting over here. If any of you have a copy of his book or want him to sign something for you, he will be sitting over there to do that. We thank him for joining us today. So our next speaker is Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, who's originally from Lansing, Michigan. He graduated from the University of Michigan in 1998. After graduating, Rabbi Charlie worked at Focus Hope, a civil and human rights organization in Detroit, Michigan, and then became the assistant director of the Amherst Survival Center, which housed a food pantry, free store, and soup kitchen in North Amherst, Massachusetts. He attended the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion at its Jerusalem and Cincinnati campuses, receiving his rabbinical ordination in 2006 and an MA in Hebrew letters in 2005. He has served at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, since 2006. He developed positive relationships with local school districts and helped organize interfaith gatherings, including numerous vigils, walks, and relationship-building events. He is a past president of the Southwest Association of Reform Rabbis and served on the steering committee of Peace Together. In 2022, he was honored as a hero against hate by the Texoma Anti-Defamation League and recently served as a special advisor to the ADL. He became the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Winston-Salem, North Carolina on July 1, 2022. Rabbi Charlie remains completely in love with his wife and simply adores his 2 daughters as well. And I would like to welcome him to the stage for the next part of our program.
So just a brief reflection before we continue on. I just want to point out, and so just kol hakavod, all the honor to Lex for the incredible story that he shared with us. I just want to point out that this is what happened to Jews all over Europe, impacted Jews throughout the world, and not just the Jewish community. While Jews are a people, I just want to say that we're also a bit of a mess. Like we're not the Jews. There's we've got our religious Jews and our secular Jews, we've got our progressive Jews and our conservative Jews, and we've got everything in between, just like basically every other people, right? And the idea that we are people, you really saw that through the story that Lex told. You really saw that commitment and dedication to family, right? The idea of trying to figure out how to maintain a sense of humanity in a world that didn't appreciate the dignity and beauty of every individual. You really saw through his story what he said at the end, bringing his story into this moment and acknowledging how easy it is to hate, how easy it is to cast doubt on an entire people, really bringing out a number of Jewish values, but not just Jewish values, but human values. And so we'll enter into a brief ceremony of memorial and honor. And we begin with silence. The silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. The silence of memory. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence. The silence of Job. The silence of the 6 million. Let us remember them as we link our silences. On International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man, the young, the old, the innocent, the 1.5 million children starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, turned to ash, because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being Jewish. And so many more, people with disabilities, the LGBT individuals, the Roma, and others deemed racially inferior. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart, and turns it to stone? What happens when victims cry for help and no one is listening? What happens when humanity fails to recognize that those who are not in our image are nonetheless in God's image, whatever we conceive God to be? We remember and pay tribute to the survivors who bore witness to what happened and to the victims, so that robbed of their lives, they would not be robbed also of their deaths. We remember and give thanks for the righteous of the nations who saved lives, often at risk of their own, teaching us how in the darkness, in the darkest night, we can light a candle of hope. Today, a couple months after International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we call on you, Almighty God, to help us hear your voice and say that in every generation, do not murder. Do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. Do not oppress the stranger. We know that while we do not have the ability to change the past, we can change the future. We know that while we cannot bring the dead back to life, we can ensure their memories live on and that their deaths were not in vain. And so on this day, we commit ourselves to one simple act: Yizkor, remember. We continue with the candle lighting ceremony to remember the millions of lives lost in the Holocaust and the countless communities shattered by hatred and violence. We light candles to honor their memories, to bear witness to the horror, and to affirm our shared commitments to dignity, decency, and human rights for all people. I'll offer a reflection for each candle and then invite a specific individual or individuals to come forward to light or turn on our candles, as the case may be. We light this first candle for the 1.5 million Jewish children, 6 million Jews altogether, who were murdered in the Holocaust. May their names and their stories live forever in our hearts. To light this candle, I'd like to invite Lindsay Lobree, second-generation survivor, son of Margot Lobree, and Regina Lobree, second-generation survivor, daughter of Erich Frisch, an Austrian Jew who represented Austria in the first torch run to the 1936 Berlin Olympics before escaping from Europe. We light this second candle in memory of all of the groups and individuals murdered because they were targeted or deemed racially inferior by the Nazi regime. People with disabilities, LGBT individuals, the Roma community, and so many more. And remembering them, we commit to building a world of inclusion and acceptance. And to light our second candle, Lori Schaefer, please. We light this third candle to honor those who survived an impossible reality, for their strength and courage, for their tenacity, and the will to live, for their ability to rebuild lives after unimaginable pain, and for every gift they and their descendants have shared with humanity. We give thanks. I'd like to invite Margot Lobree and Lex Silbinger to come forward to light this candle for all of the survivors. Thank you. We light this fourth candle for those who fought back, from underground networks to individuals who defied hate, for those brave soldiers who liberated the camps, who carried the dead and near dead in their arms to a kinder and more humane future. For those who served with the Allied forces to put an end to tyranny and oppression, we honor their service to humanity. For our fourth candle, I'd like to invite Cindy Briggs, professor of counseling and documentarian, oral historian, whose grandfather liberated a concentration camp at the end of World War II. We light this fifth candle for the courageous souls who risked everything to save others and oppose the Nazis, the righteous among the nations of all backgrounds who risked their lives to put others before themselves. Their legacy stands as a shining beacon to all humanity that compassion and mercy can triumph over cruelty and hatred. To light our fifth candle, John Holmes, pastor of Marshall Baptist Church here in Winston-Salem, who also spent much of his life as a missionary in Africa. We light this sixth candle, remembering Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur. We light a candle for those who live even now under the yoke of oppression in places where the threat of genocide is real and ever present. We pray that education will indeed be a force for good as we invite Melissa, is it Aggie? Agee, Director of English and Language Arts and Humanities for Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools, a former English teacher, Holocaust educator. Melissa now supervises all ELA and social studies teachers in our county. May the light of these candles guide us toward empathy, understanding, and action. We pray that we can work together so that hatred in all its forms finds no home in our world. We conclude with Eli, Eli, written by Hannah Senesh, offered by Jason McKinney, the music director at Temple Emmanuel. Hannah Senesh was a poet who fought in the resistance. She was Jewish. And even though she was tortured, she never gave up her fellow soldiers or her fellow Jews. And she wrote these beautiful words of hope. Eli, Eli, which literally means my God, which will be offered in Hebrew and English.
Rush el-hamayim berak ha-shamayim tfilot ha'aram ha'chol ve'hayom rish el-hamayim berak ha-shamayim tefillot that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, and the prayer of the heart. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, and the prayer of the heart.
I encourage you to allow that incredible song of hope, written at one of the most challenging times in history, to stay with you. I encourage you to allow the story that you heard from Lex, the powerful story of escape, the powerful story of the will to survive, to stay with you, and to encourage you to continue to explore, to continue to learn, to continue to uphold that value of, in Hebrew, B'Tselem Elohim, the understanding that all of us are created in God's image, that every human life is holy, that we all deserve dignity and beauty in our lives. Every race, every background, every religion, every person. You have the opportunity to continue to learn additional stories. Please stay with us for a little while, explore the panels in back, enjoy refreshments, and there will be a book signing with Lex for those who would like to participate in that, to get what he can share in his words. I'm sure is only a small taste of what he has in his more full account in the book. And so I want to offer my gratitude for Forsyth Tech, for Muse, for the North Carolina Holocaust Council, and for all of the individuals, incredible individuals involved in helping to bring this to our community. Dee Dee, thank you for being here today and representing. And for each of you who came out this morning on a makeup day for International Holocaust Remembrance, thank you for your presence. Because today we form community and we come together as community. And the one thing that every community needs is people. People who are willing to learn with curiosity. People who are willing to stand up for one another. Thank you for your presence.